Hi, I'm Norm Abram, and welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. Boy, have I got a great project for you today. It's this shaker bedside table with graceful tapered legs. We found a version of this table at a village where the Shakers lived and worked. That's next, right here on the New Yankee Workshop.
The New Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram and is made possible by...
If you were a deacon living in this Shaker community 150 years ago, you would be charged with a lot of responsibility. So you might leave yourself some notes on a chalkboard such as this. For instance, today, you need to organize a crew to fix the fences in the north orchard. And also you must move the Holsteins from second family to church lot. Then too, what has happened to the missing keys you've been entrusted with? Well, it's beginning to look like you're going to have to spend some time taking care of business. Maybe at a table like this. And look at this one. It even has some ink stains on it. Maybe put there 75 years ago. But it's a beautiful piece. This top made from one single pine board. And down here, a little storage drawer with dovetail joinery. And the thing that really gives this piece lightness and elegance, the tapered leg. A piece like this might go anywhere in today's modern home, but if I had one, I think I'd use it as a bedside table. Now, before we begin, I'd like to reassure you that if you'd like to build an exact copy of today's project, a measured drawing is available. And you'll hear more about that before this program ends. Now I'll show you how I built this bedside table. From a woodworker's point of view, the only unusual thing about this bedside table is the tapered leg. It's straight on the outside, and it's tapered on the inside. That looks difficult to make, but it's really not that bad. I'll show you a little bit later. First thing I want to do, though, is start making some material, putting some material together for this top. And this morning I glued up some boards that are over here, and they're set in some pipe clamps. You know, today it's almost impossible to find a board that's 16.5 inches wide. And even if you could, later on you might have trouble with warping and twisting. So the best thing to do is to glue several boards together. In this case, 3 individual boards. The thing you want to do is pay attention to the growth rings. The growth rings are these lines which curve, and that shows you that the bark of the tree was out here on this board, on this one, on the other side, and on this one over here. So by alternating the growth rings, you end up with a stronger and a more stable top. Another thing I did was glue up some stock for my legs. And what I have to end up with is an 1.5 inch square piece of stock. Another type of material that's not that easy to find. So I've glued 2 boards together. And I've got 4 blanks over here that I'm ready to start milling. And I made the blanks a little bit wider than what I really need, because it's almost impossible to glue up stock and keep it perfectly even. So I'm going to start squaring it up by running one side through the saw. Now with one side milled, I'll readjust my fence to just a little bit over 1.5 inches. And then using the already milled side against my rip fence, I'll square up the other edge. Well, now I'm going to square up one end of these leg blanks. Now I can cut them to length, and I'm going to use this stop on my real fancy miter box extension. I want 26 inches. Not totally essential to have this, but boy, it sure speeds things up here at the shop. Let's take another look at our table again, and I'll give you the recipe for making the tapered legs. But take a look at the table. Doesn't it appear to you that the legs are further apart at the bottom than they are at the top. They're not. It's exactly the same distance to the outside. The designers of this table, the Shakers, did that deliberately. It's an illusion. It makes the piece lighter by tapering the legs. I think they were very effective in achieving what they wanted. But when I make these tapers, I don't want them to start up at the top. I want them to start below these rails so that I can fit these in squarely. So I'll taper this side of the leg and also this side of the leg. So all 4 legs have to be tapered on the inside. And I'll do that over here on my table saw with a tapering jig. Now you can buy these, but I made this one. It has a hinge that's attached to 2 pieces of oak. And then over here there's an adjustment feature, and by changing that I can get an infinite number of different wedges. So I've set it up for our legs, and you'll see that when you put a piece of wood in it and put the jig against the rip fence, as you push it through, you'll remove more and more material, and we'll get the taper that we want. Now I'll do all 4 legs. The next thing I want to do to the legs is mortise them. And by that I mean put a groove in each leg into which our side rails will fit like this. This is called a mortise and tenon joint. It gives me a lot of glue surface area right here, and it's the perfect choice for an application like this. Now I'll make all the mortises over here on this table with a router mounted underneath it. And I've installed a 1/2-inch grooving bit. And notice I've also taken the time to put down some masking tape which shows me the cutting edges where they begin and end on the bit. Now the thing you want to do is take the time to do the layout of these legs. Put an X where each mortise is going to be. That's very important. You want to keep it closest to the straight side of the leg, and you want to hold it back just a bit so that as you put the side rails in, you'll end up with about 1/8 of an inch reveal. And you also want it to be on the tapered side of the leg. Also, I've added a couple other marks right here, these beginning and ending points. And because I just can't push each piece through to make the mortise, I need those marks to show me where to drop my piece down over the bit, push it through, and remove it. Take a look. Now here on the front side of the table, which is the drawer side, things are a little bit different. I have 2 rails, one here and one here. So the mortising is going to have to be done a little bit differently. I'm going to need 2. One right here, which will be for the bottom rail, and one up here, which will be for the top rail. Now, once again, pay attention to that layout. You see I've put the witness marks where the cuts have to be, and on the other side I've put my guidelines, which I'll use over at the router table. Let's try one. Now we're going to start making the rails, these pieces right here. You have to remember that there's a tenon on each end of the rails, so I want to add 1 inch to the overall dimension between the legs. So that means I need 2 pieces, 10 1/4, and 2 pieces, 14 1/2, and I'll cut them right here on the miter saw. Okay, now we can start making those tenons over here, and the first cut is a shoulder cut. Make this shoulder cut on both sides and both ends of all 4 pieces. So I've set the blade to the right height and distance, and notice I've clamped on a gauge block. because I'm using my T-square in combination with the rip fence, and that prevents any kickback or bind up. Now I'll raise the blade up so that it's 3/4 of an inch above the table saw surface so that I can make these shoulder cuts that are at the top and bottom and on each end of the back and side pieces. Okay, the next cut to make is the cheek cut to remove the rest of this material. And I've tried a little sample piece here because I want to make sure that that fit is just right. And that's nice, just snug. Well, that does it for the tenon. Now, if you remember, one piece I didn't make this shoulder cut right here. I'm going to use this piece to rip two 1 1/4 inch rails for the front of the table. Well, now's the time to sand off any of those witness marks and guidelines that I've put on the legs. And one more thing, because the mortises have rounded ends here, I want to just take a sharp utility knife and knock off those square corners on the tenons. Okay, let's see how that fits. That's good. Now a good quality yellow carpenter's glue applied to each joint, and then make sure it's spread out with a little brush here. And then we'll put each corner together one at a time, wiping off any excess that might squeeze out or get on the pieces with a damp sponge. And we can put the whole thing together. All right, these clamps will hold it in place until the glue sets up. Now let's turn our attention back to the top. The glue is set up and dried, so I can unclamp it. And the first thing that I'm going to do is scrape off the glue. And to do that, I'm just going to use an ordinary paint scraper. And I let the glue set up like this so that there's just beads to remove instead of letting the glue get spread out and work its way into the wood. This is a much better way to do it. Okay, let's take a look at our completed table again. You notice that the three boards have been edged with these two pieces of wood on each side, and that's called a breadboard design. This is what the old breadboards look like, and what they were used for, I suppose, is to roll out dough. And when they did that, they would become subject to a certain amount of moisture, and these bands would help to stabilize the top. I think it's a great design for our table, and to get started making it, the first thing I'm going to do is rip the table top down to 16 inches. Next thing I want to do is square up my top. And I suppose I could use my T-square, which usually goes in like this, and it works pretty well. But with a wide board, I end up starting with the square way off the edge of the table, and it's not very steady. So I'm going to use something else, something called a panel cutter. This is a homemade one. It's just a piece of plywood with a cleat screwed on it. And on the bottom, there's a piece of hardwood which rides in the same groove as the little T-square does. In fact, this is just a big square. And now I'll just square up one edge of my top. And I want to cut it to 16 7/8 inches. Now, in order to attach the breadboard edge, I need to make a tongue on the top, and then our edge will slip onto that. And I've set up the saw 3/4 of an inch away from the fence and about 1/4 of an inch deep. In order to remove the rest of the material to make the tongue, you have to make a couple adjustments. I'm going to raise the blade, and using the previous cut as a guide so that it's just even with that cut, like that. And then I do have to readjust the fence so that it's at 1/2 inch between the fence and the blade. And now I'm ready to complete the tongue. You notice that I've removed a little bit of the tongue on each corner. And that's so that when the breadboard edge is attached, I won't see that sticking through. And when I make the edge, there's some wood remaining. To make this groove, I use the router table. Except this time, I've installed a 1/4 inch grooving bit and another piece of tape to mark the beginning and end of the cutting edge. And on each piece, I'll put a pencil mark as a guide so that I'll end up with this much wood remaining. Now, the depth of this cut is about 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to cut that in 2 passes, about 3/8 of an inch at a time. And that's because this is a small router bit, and trying to make a deep plunge cut in one shot is hard on the router and on the bit. Take a look. A little bit of yellow carpenter's glue. Just spread it out evenly with a little brush here. I'm ready to slip the edge right on. Set it in my clamps. Now for the drawer. It's made out of 1/2 inch pine with a 1/4 inch plywood bottom. And the sides and the front have been grooved to accept the 1/4 inch bottom. The back is fit into a dado joint. And the front has a rabbet joint. First one I want to do is that rabbet joint. And I've set up the table saw with a dado head cutter, which is just 2 blades that are set at an angle to one another, and it plows out material. Again, using a gauge block and my T-square, I'll run each end of that front through. Okay, that'll fit together nicely. Now I'll have to make some saw adjustments so I can cut the dado in the side pieces to accept the back. Okay, a little more yellow carpenter's glue, and I can start to put this together. Now, the glue is only at the joints. We want to leave this piece of 1/4-inch plywood, which goes in the bottom, floating, so that it can expand and contract freely with changes in moisture. We don't want it to expand so much that it can, if it was glued to the sides, it might break it open when it's swelled up. I guess I will admit that this is a pretty lightweight drawer, but it isn't that big, and how much can you really put in it? Now the corners will get nailed together with some 1-inch brads. Well, now I need a way to hold the top to the base. And what I did is made these little cleats right here. And they fit in like this. And these screws will fasten it to the rails. And then I've got some additional screws right here which will hold the top down. Well, the belt sander does a great job with the initial sanding, but there's nothing like a palm sander to finish it off. Well, that looks pretty good. Now I can take the top and flip it over so that the bottom side is facing up, and just take the whole leg assembly, the base of the table, set it on the top, and fasten it in place with 4 drywall screws. Okay, now I need something to hold my drawer in place. So I've made some cleats. They're just pieces of 1x2 that are screwed together so that you get an angle, and those will get fastened right here to the side rails. But I want to make sure I keep this just slightly above our front rail so the drawer will ride on this rather than on the rail. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a drawer without a knob to pull it open. A little bit more fine sanding on this piece and it'll be ready for some finishing. Well, it sure is nice having this designated area to do all my finishing. You know, we've tried to do it in the shop, and it's just impossible. There's too much dust in there. It settles around. You can't get rid of it. Out here, at least I have a relatively dust-free environment. Now, in this project, I'm starting with what's called a sanding sealer, and I'm applying it to the areas of the table that you're really not going to see, just to protect the wood so it won't absorb moisture and start to warp and twist. Now, I'll also do that to the inside and bottom side of my drawer, and then I'll get working on the side that we're going to see. Well, the next step is to apply a pre-stain sealer. And it's absorbed by the softer wood a little more than the hard, so I'll end up being able to control the depth of my stain. Let me show you on a piece that I've done for a sample. The stain I want to use was applied to raw wood, and you can see it's very uneven and blotchy. And then over here, over the pre-stained sealer. And by rubbing it at different degrees, I ended up with this little area right here, which is what I want to use on my table. So I apply the sealer lightly, let it sit according to the directions for 5 to 10 minutes, and then wipe it off. Okay, that's all wiped off. And the instructions say that I should wait at least an hour before I put some stain on. Well, this stain should give me a country pine look. I'll put it on with the brush and then let it sit and wipe it down a bit. Well, I would say that that's about the look that I want. Now, with the stain sufficiently dried, I'm ready for the first coat, which is a sanding sealer. Well, after the sanding sealer dried, I sanded it with a very fine sandpaper, and I like to use a 320 grit wet dry sandpaper. What happens, though, is you get a little bit of residue left over. That's supposed to happen. But before you put the finish on, you have to clean it off. And I like to use a tack cloth, which is really just cheesecloth that's treated with material to make it sticky. And once all that residue has been removed, I'm ready to put on my first coat of finish, which in this case is going to be a satin finish polyurethane. And that'll give me a nice, durable surface. Well, here's a piece of friendly advice. When you get ready to build one of these, you better build two, because everybody's going to want one of these. And everybody's going to want one of these, a bathroom vanity, modeled after the old dry sinks of the past. And that's our project next week, right here on the New Yankee Workshop.
The New Yankee Workshop is made possible by If you would like a measured drawing of the bedside table, please send $5 to Bedside Table, New Yankee Workshop, Box E, Bedford, Mass. 01730.